Hi guys, I'm Irene. You're watching Perpetually Paperback. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. Today I'm going to be talking about my best of 2021. All right, so I'm just gonna get into the top books I read this year. I don't think that actually many of these came out. A couple of them came out this year, actually. Not everything did. This was just what I read this year that I loved. So I'm gonna start with, I think I just am gonna do them in the order that I read them. I don't know that there's any, I do rate things by star rating, but really I think those are very arbitrary. I would say these are the ones that have stuck with me the longest, that after a year of reading, these really stood out. So the first one is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I read this one along with a couple other Taylor Jenkins Reid books this year for my author's taste test of her. This was one that really for me lived up to the hype, and there was a lot of hype for this one. Honestly, I really was not a TJR fan. I was thinking that I would hate it. If you hear noise in the background, we have a little puppy that's playing around, so just ignore. Anyway, it basically follows Evelyn Hugo, who's this old Hollywood actress, and it's her as she's giving this exclusive interview to this hand-selected person from this newspaper. We find out, why she selected her, and her story is just interesting. I also am a big fan of old Hollywood, and this kind of gave me all those vibes. It was really the first Taylor Jenkins Reid that spoke to me so really. I thought it lived up to the hype. I thought it was fantastic. For me, it really worked. I read some of her other ones this year, and none of them have worked quite so much as this one did. She is really good at writing unlikable characters, though, and I think she really does a fantastic job with Evelyn Hugo. All right. After that, I read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is actually the first book I read this year. It has stuck with me for an entire year. It really also was another one that lived up to the hype. There were a lot of them that I read this year that I feel like last year I read a bunch of books and I feel like they did not live up to the hype. I think this year we can say in my booktube journey, I'm better able to discern the books that I think I'm going to enjoy. I'm so glad that I read this one. Mostly, my aunt told me about it. She was absolutely right. This was fantastic. It was not at all what I expected. And I don't want to say a whole lot about it because I think largely what made me love it is because I knew so little about it. I will say that this has really, really beautiful imagery of just some marshlands and estuaries in the South. Just really gorgeous imagery. Also, just the story was intricate, well told, beautiful. I enjoyed it so much. Moving on. Next, I read one that is almost I really struggled to whether I even wanted to put this on the list just because The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. It is gorgeously written. It was fantastic. It's a story that you've heard. I constantly say I will read anything. I will read anything that I've read a million different times. If the writer is good, it will be interesting. And that is exactly what Madeline Miller gives us with this. It is a story that you know, but towards the end of it, literally as you're going through it, you're just is this actually what happened? It's such a compelling way to tell a story that we've heard so many times. She just pulls at your heartstrings and this made me cry a lot. It was so beautiful. It was everything. So that was an absolutely fantastic read. Another one that completely lives up to the hype. I had heard it was beautifully written, but I didn't realize exactly how beautiful it was. Fantastic. Next, we move on to Razorblade Tears by S.A. Crosby. This was one of the best thrillers I read this year. This got me on such a thriller kick. I like to read genres all over the place, and I think you'll really find that on the list, on all of my lists, really. I really like to read diversely. I get bored of reading the same thing all the time. So, I'd heard really good things about it. I'm part of Book of the Month, and it happened to be one of them. It was my selection that month. And then one of my friends and I read it, buddy read it together. I thought the reading experience was fantastic. It is extremely fast-paced. It is intricate. It is interesting. Just a well-told story. It touches on a lot of subjects that are done really well. It discusses, you know, LGBTQ plus issues. It discusses like families and forgiveness and acceptance in a really beautiful way, in a way that you wouldn't expect from a thriller, especially with what goes on in this one. It is intense in some parts. I didn't particularly find it too gory, I would say, or too, I'm not the kind of person that finds those things really difficult. So definitely check trigger warnings or content warnings if that's something that you are very sensitive to. But I thought that one was absolutely fantastic. My friend also very much, like both of us had a really great reading experience on that one. That one's fantastic. So glad to see that it was on a lot of top contender lists. I know it was one of the finalists for the book of the month, book of the year. I wish more people had read it. It was really, really good. So definitely check that one out if you haven't. After that, another book of the month selection was The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This book was like everything that I would want in a book. It's a fantasy book about Orquídea and her family, and it's not magical realism, it's definitely fantasy. Like the magical elements are apparent in it, but also it was just kind of a ridiculous out there story, and I just appreciated it. I appreciated the multi-generationalness of it, the intricacy of the story, the way that magic was woven into it, and all of the characters I think were written really, really fantastically. You mostly focus on two of the grandchildren and a great-granddaughter, I believe, and at the beginning of the book is not a good indication of what the book will end up being like. It was a fantastic journey. I loved this one so much. I would say this is probably the one I personally, I really enjoyed the reading experience on every single one of these, but that might have been, like I would say, if I were to write a book, it would be along the lines of this type of writing. It reminded me of Nicaragua. It reminded me of a lot of different things. The imagery of Ecuador I thought was really beautiful. I just have nothing but amazing things to say about that. If you like fantasy, especially like Latin American kind of magical realism based fantasy, because it's not magical realism, it's definitely fantasy. There's magical elements for sure, but it felt more magical realism side versus full fantasy side. So if that's something, if you like a kind of a soft core fantasy, I would definitely check this one out. This is a really good introduction. Really great story. Next, I want to talk about a book that I actually found incredibly surprising, and at first I really didn't like. It's China Room by Sanjeev Sahota. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize, I believe. That's not how I heard about it. It was just on Book of the Month, and I always read everything that comes out, and it just happened to be incredibly interesting to me. It was interesting. It was told in a way, like it was written in a very interesting way. At some point, like I was probably confused for a good 75% of the book as far as, you know, what we were doing there. Sorry, I kicked the camera. What we're doing there, why we're there, who we're supposed to be following. There was a lot of questions that this one gave, but I really found the reading experience completely fulfilling. I found it to be one of the more interesting stories that I've read, period. It was told in a really interesting way about some subject matter that I didn't know about, or didn't have a lot of information about. It was also pretty short, which, to be able to tell a story that sticks with you like that in so few words, I think is a really fantastic feat. I don't think it ended up going that far in the Booker Prize ultimately, but I definitely think this is worth checking out. If you like literary fiction at all, I think this was a really interesting take. It follows a girl named Mehar, and she is trying to figure out which of the three brothers is her husband. That is juxtaposed with a grandson who's kind of coming back to visit the family who is going through some issues, and the story of them two together and how they weave and heal and learn is, I thought it was just really well done. I really enjoyed it personally. So China Room by Sanjeev Sahota. Finally, I'm going to talk about one that, yes, it was one of the best of the year. Yes, I did have have a really great reading experience, but with a caveat. So I'm going to talk about Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. Ultimately, I really liked it. I liked this installment. However, this was the second time I was reading it. The first time I probably got about 20 hours. I got about 400, 500 pages in and stopped. This was probably the month it came out. My boyfriend and I were both reading it together, and I don't know, for whatever reason, we just completely lost interest. And I made it my mission for the month of December to completely finish this book. It's like a 1,200 page honker, okay? Like it's a big one. It took me pretty much the whole month of December, and partially was because I had purchased the graphic audio version of this book. This is not a sponsored video. I just think their rendition of this series was just fantastic, and it really changed the reading experience for me. If you aren't familiar, graphic audio is a service where they dramatize the audiobooks and they add additional background. So I don't know, they started doing that with some of the Star Wars ones, but basically it's like they add background noise to a lot of these scenes. And I think it really just makes it much more alive. For many parts of the book, I actually followed along on the text itself. I do have the book, but the graphic audio version was just so fantastic. Now, I wouldn't say this is one of the top ones of the year. I definitely had some problems with this one. I found the first 400 pages to be incandescently boring. Just, that was killing me. I will probably do a larger review on this one. We're waiting to talk to one of my friends about it, but there was so much good, and then there was some stuff that for me just didn't work well, particularly with the pacing issue that I think this is really what this book suffered from. We did, however, get some perspectives and some chapters that we had not seen, but I'm going to go into more detail on that when I talk about the Stormlight Archive and this installment of that. But ultimately, it did end up still being one of the best reads of the year. So this is my list for 2021. Stay tuned. I've got some other videos coming up. My worst of the year, for sure. It's always a favorite. And then just some of the most disappointing and surprising reads of the year, along with some other reading plans. So if you're interested, stay tuned. I'll see you guys next time.